Hello, everyone. We have heard this many, many times at this stage, what happened last week, particularly the Minister for Justice talking about bringing in the army to shut people down, to suppress them, to shut them up, to put them back into their houses. And of course, this is the first time ever I have ever heard that for the first time ever they deployed the army, the Irish army, against their own people, not against a foreign army, not against anybody else. Where the army probably should be, and this is to Jim O'Callaghan, to the Minister for Defence, Helen McEntee, they probably should be at the airports and the ports, because there's people walking into this country with no passports, no documentation. There's people coming in here committing crimes, etc. We only have maybe 30 people in the Gardaí designated to deal with people coming into the country, the Garda immigration unit. There's only about 30, maybe 40. Should there not be 300 of the defence forces not designated to help them, Gardaí, find these people that shouldn't be in the state and put them home? And the same with them coming in with no passports. The defence forces probably should be at the airport checking passports, etc., to help on Garda Síochána and scrutinise people seeking asylum in this country, etc. That's where the army should be, because that's the defence of the state. That's the defend of the state. Because there's people coming here and abusing the state and have no passports, not showing who they are. But there's one example I could give. There was fellow that give the Gardaí 16 different names because he has no identification. He give the Gardaí 16 different names. And of course, he has something to hide when he's willing to say 16 different names. But anyway, that's what I'm trying to say. That's the defence of the state. But turning the army against their own citizens, their own people. And the reason they did that, because they're Irish. And the majority of this case, 99.9% are Irish. And not even that. I would say they go even further than that, that they hate the Irish people. They absolutely have a disdain for the Irish people. And I know it was only maybe 6 or 7 soldiers at most of the defence forces that were mobilised, etc. But even just the thought, and this is, it's, as Paul Murphy, and I usually don't agree with Paul Murphy 99% of the time, but he's very right in this, that it sets a very bad example, and it sets a very bad precedent that the army can be mobilised to basically go to protest and stuff, because at the end of the day it's the Gardaí, it's up to the Gardaí to sort it out, because they're the civil authority, it's not the military authority. This is not a military matter. Simple as that. The defence forces, as I say, protecting the state from people coming in that could have ideologies, who want to do harm to the people of Ireland, who want to cause distress to the people of Ireland. That's defending the state. But a few farmers protesting, a few tractors, and a few lorries is not an issue for the army. That's not an issue for the army. That's an issue for the government. That's an issue for the Garda Síochána. That's not an issue for the army. The issues for the army is people that are planning terrorist attacks in this state. We've seen recently in Galway too, the young lad that wanted to stab a chaplain, etc., motivated by ISIS, etc. They're threats to the state. They're dangers to the state. The army should be focused on that, and other people that are training ISIS, take us up in the mountains of Wicklow. For years they were doing that. The army will know to be found to stop that. So don't lecture me about the army being put in. But Jim O'Callaghan should be gone too. He should be resigned. He should be probably in prison. That's to be totally honest where he should be going. Because it's unimaginable to say this even 30 years ago, to say that the Irish government would send their own army, their own people, to go and shut people up. And that's what they pretty much wanted to do, and to frighten people. That's what they used it are. Now, Helen McEntee and the Minister for Justice are saying, oh, I didn't give permission and to go. Because at the end of the day, Jim O'Callaghan is the Minister for Justice. He's no say in the Defence Forces. It's the Minister for Defence, Helen McEntee, and God bless us all, Helen McEntee. But, because another useless one. But she said she didn't give permission. Of course, the Minister for Defence authorises the use of the army. So Helen McEntee should have probably said, hold on, Jim, for a second. GI Jim, we're going to call him from now on. This does not look good. And it didn't look good across the whole world. I seen it in papers in America, on social media, etc. The first thing that was said in every paragraph, the Irish government calls in the army against their own people, not against people that are not even from the state, that claiming asylum. They didn't go bring in the army for that. And there's many other times they could have brought in the army for stuff. Take for example, there was a storm recently, last February. There was no sign of the army. The army were nowhere to be found, missing in action. There was no talk about deploying the army. They should have been deployed to help the local authorities clear roads, because there was many trees down, there was many flooding, there was many things happened, and the Irish government wouldn't deploy the army when the people needed it. There was people weeks, 2-3 weeks without electricity, without water in some cases. I know of people in Cavan, there were 2 weeks without water, without electricity too. They said the two of them together, and there was no sign in the army, there was no sign of the state. The state basically just abandoned them people and fucked off for 2 weeks and didn't help them. These are Irish citizens, they couldn't give a shit. And that's as simple as that, and that just sums up the whole lot of it. The Irish state couldn't give a shit. If you're Irish, they don't care. Simple as that. That's simple as that. They couldn't care less. And that's the problem here. They couldn't care less, because the majority of farmers, etc., are Irish. And that's their fathers were farming the land. Their grandfathers were farming the land. And that's the thing. Even in Cavan, for example, there's people I know. I'm not a farmer son or from a farming background, but I know of people And I know people around me here, their father owned the farm, their grandfather owned the land. They farmed for generations. They've been farming, and still they hope their children will farm. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they won't, because the state would take their land probably and say you're not allowed because you're the cows, etc. We can't have that. But because that's what is happening, it's unprofitable for the young generation now to take over that land and to look after them. Again, you won't not be happy is the great example. But this is the thing. I think it's an evil, and it sets a very bad precedent for any protest in the future, that the state on a whim. And again, this was an escalation above an escalation, because this enraged people something fierce. It enraged everybody. Whatever people were before, you're only citizens for the country, were against, say, the protests before. When they said about bringing in the army, everybody was for the protests, because that was an escalation. Never in my life I thought I hear the Irish government say we're going to bring the army in our own people, on our own people. It's absolutely scandalous, because we won't listen to them. We want to shut them up, and that's as simple as that. Whatever way you want to look at, that's what it was, to shut people up, to tell them to go home, use force. They probably would shot them all if they got away with the government. To be told, they think very little of people. To be totally honest, they would have probably give the order to shoot. Now I don't know whether the soldiers follow it. That's another thing. And then some of the defence forces, the people in the defence forces, said to the officers and NCOs, "No, we won't do it." I hope they did. I hope there was a few soldiers that said, "No, fuck you. Go and do it yourself," to the officers. I hope some of them did, but I don't know. A lot of them would be probably terrified. And I say this to members from Garda Síochána too. They have, of course, they have a job to. I'm not going to dispute that. They have a job, they have a duty to do to the state. But at the end of the day, some of the tactics that was used was very scummy. And not even that too. The protest, the spraying, pepper spraying. I don't think even pepper spraying was necessary. And we've seen it down in Whitegate. It was not necessary in my opinion. I know only a few people pepper sprayed, but I don't think it was necessary. We didn't really see that much violence from the protest. There was maybe one or two bad eggs. Of course, you get that everywhere, regardless of what protest. But I don't think it was necessary to pepper spray people. I generally don't. But that's just my view on it. But as I say, I think it's very bad presence, and it looks very bad in the country on social media that the Irish government would consider deploying the army to shut people up. Because there's no other way of really putting it. That's just the beginning and end of it. It's to shut people up. And it's a sad state of affairs, because regardless, say for example, if it's a protest from now on about, say, healthcare, say the amount of people waiting on waiting lists, and the state doesn't like it, they can send in the army to and you see that in Russia, you see in China. That's what you see. That's where you see this happening, that they send in the army to shut people up. Like, let's be fair, when we talk about democracy, etc., it's delusions we're living. We live in delusions if we generally do think that in a democracy we can summon the army in at any point to shut people up. Because that's pretty much what they want to do. And now only for people backward and upward, like holy hell, and it's probably because, again, some of the soldiers wouldn't do it. Hopefully there was a few soldiers that said no. Because at the end of the day, and I say this to the soldiers of the defence forces, the people in the 1940s said I was only following orders. You follow orders that are legal. Don't follow orders that officers in the government, particularly when it's coming from the government. You have allegiance to the Irish Republic, not to the government. And just remember that. Regardless what officer says it, at the end of the day, it's whatever the Constitution says. And the Constitution says that it's not the army's responsibility to go in and start moving protesters, etc. It's the responsibility of Garda Síochána, at the very least the civil authorities, not the military authorities. And not to mention the army, the government are not the army's friend. We see cutbacks and cutbacks and cutbacks. So yeah, let me know what you think. Subscribe for more, and bye.